Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. You can find me and my books and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com as well as on Amazon. And my books are on audio as well. I've got a brand new guest on. I'm very happy to have Elizabeth McNeese on. She's from Ohio. She's an Ohio mom who has been advocating for reform and justice in our courts, co-authoring legislation and working with Ohio lawmakers to try and make things better for Ohio families. I welcome you, Elizabeth McNeese. What piqued your curiosity on these family court systems, even though you were never, thankfully, a litigant in these systems?
Yeah. I mean, I was a litigant. I did go through a divorce. I'm now remarried, but I don't have a real sad sob story. And so a lot of times, people who advocate in this space are doing so because they've experienced some horrific things. Fortunately, that was not my case, but I've seen a lot. And when I went through my divorce, I did get a little peek into the window of how things work. I didn't come from a family of divorce, so I never been around it. My parents actually were foster parents, and adoptive parents. So I was very trusting of the system, and I believed that it worked, and that truth prevails. And the more I networked with families going through divorce, the more I started seeing systemic problems. And I just have a knack for advocacy. I have three children. Two of my children are grown. My youngest is about to turn 18, but
Hmm.
he does have developmental disabilities, and so I've been an advocate at heart since he was born. When you have a special needs child, you tend to pick up that banner of advocacy. And then when I started seeing the systemic problems, it offended me almost at what I was seeing and the way that things work, and it surprised me. So I just I felt called almost to bring not only bring awareness, but make some changes, because the more you look at it, especially in Ohio, and I think this is in most states, the way the laws are written really do give courts broad discretion,
Um,
a lot of power to issue orders that they feel are best for a child. The evidentiary standards are low, and so there's just a lot of wild things that happen in family courts, and our laws, the way they're written, actually not only allow that, but in some instances require that. So I felt like, well, let's go to the state house. I live close to Columbus, so it's easy for me to just head up there and start meeting with lawmakers, which is what I did. As you mentioned, co-authoring legislation. And the more I was advocating at the state house, I started this 5 years ago, and initially it was very well received because I think most everyone would look at family courts and say, wow, this is a mess. We've got to change some things. So my messages were well received. And, my first one I co-authored, was introduced right away with 61 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives. So it was very popular. That caught the judiciary and the Bar Association um, by surprise. And
mhm.
they came out very heavy. We're still battling them to this day. But I got involved because of what I was seeing, and I just felt like someone had to do something. And because I don't have that baggage of going through a bad situation myself, I felt like I could bring a level-headedness to it, and I could represent families without the distraction of my own case.
I agree. I agree because when you have that baggage and that's on your mind, I mean, you can be professional, but you still have these emotions of the hell they put you through, and so, the there's past reform efforts with these, family court systems, and nothing is working. There's no reform that can happen, in my opinion. I just think they should just be abolished, but I don't know when that is going to happen.
Yeah, I actually do agree with that. So when I initially set out, I thought, well, if we could just create, legislation that, fixes some of these massive flaws, things could get better, even if it's incremental. 5 years later, I don't know that that will be enough because the flaws are even greater than I could have possibly imagined. Um, the whole the whole crux of family court is taking, in some instances, criminal matters. Okay. When we're talking about child safety and well-being, we're talking about abuse. We're
Mhm.
talking about domestic violence. Those are criminal actions and accusations. And family court is not a real court of justice. You do not have due process. You do not have a right to an attorney. There is no innocent till proven guilty. It has a very low evidentiary threshold. So you don't even have to have hard, true evidence. The court can choose to believe what they want to believe and then implement a decision based on their gut, essentially. That is not a true court of law. So we're dealing with, in some of these instances, truly criminal situations, and we're not even dealing with them in a real court. So that's flaw number one.
Mhm.
And then the other one is actually greater because it impacts all cases, not just severe cases of abuse and domestic violence. And that's just regular folks, regular parents who decided to end a relationship. And now they're stuck in court. And the only standard really that courts have is the best interest of the child standard.
Mhm.
That is not a measurable standard. So it is completely inefficient. And yet, everything, all of the laws, all of it hangs on that one idea of the best interest of the child. But the best interest of the child is not one measurable, two, it is not defined,
Mhm.
and it's very subjective.
Mhm.
So it's whatever the court believes personally is best for that child. So you have two judges looking at the exact same case, they can come to completely different conclusions because it is subjective, and our laws create that. The best interest of the child standard in Ohio, that came around 30 years ago. And they were trying to take the emphasis off of parents and what parents felt like they had a right to, and instead focus on what's best for children. That is all just linguistical fluff.
Mhm.
It doesn't actually mean anything, but they are hell bent on maintaining that standard because what that standard does is it protects their discretion. It protects their power to decide what they want. And it also protects all of the players, the guardians ad litem, all the evaluators, the attorneys. Everybody can kind of do what they want as long
Mhm.
as they use the words, well, it's in the best interest of the child. So to
Yeah.
your point, I don't know that we can really reform it truly. It's just we have to, in my mind, just get rid of it and start over because it's the wrong platform. It's the wrong approach. It's not working. And as long as we maintain, the family courts dealing with serious issues and keeping the best interest of the child standard, it's never going to work.
Right. And these judges are, they're tied to these attorneys who are a huge part of this problem as far as dragging cases out, filing continuances, and making parents wait to even see their child, which in turn causes other psychological problems for that child. But these third-party parasites, these guardian ad litems, attorney for the child, custody evaluators, they have to, when did they evolve? It seems like what, in the last 10 to 15 years, did we start hearing about a guardian ad litem? I'm not sure. But they're useless because a parent will tell them something and then they'll twist it and turn it the next day in court.
Right. Well, and they can do that, and they do that because they're only looking out for the best interest of the child, which is subjective to what they personally believe is best for a child. So they have to bring in their own bias because that's not a defined standard. So anyone who is charged with looking after the best interest of the child is going to have a different view on what is best for children. So that bias is not only present, it's allowed and it's required. And that's why things are so messy. Guardians ad litem in Ohio are typically attorneys. So these are
Mhm.
not child development specialists. They're not psychologists. They're attorneys.
Yeah.
So they're looking at what is best for a child based on the law. not necessarily what is actually, because the law is silent, at least in Ohio for sure, on what is generally best for children. So when the law is silent, they have to apply their own ideas. Same thing with the judges, same thing. And attorneys, they all are all arguing based on what they present as the subjective best interest of the child. So there really can be no resolution because everybody has a different idea on what is best for kids.
Right. And these judges, they don't want to make a decision. So they'll go off based on what either CPS says or what the guardian ad litem says. That way they don't have to make a decision and it's not on them.
Right, right. And the more people you bring in, the more it muddies the water. So that protects you, as a jurist. It protects you from appeal. It's really hard to appeal bad orders. Yes, it can be done. People have done it, but it's really hard to do because as long as their order says, the court finds that it's in the best interest of the child, that they've covered their butts,
Yes.
and that's all they really need to do because again, they're allowed to interpret what is best for that child based and often on just what they're told. Um, you know, it's wild to me that when you are dealing with fit parents, so I mean, there's obviously two categories. There's the parents who are dangerous. There
Hmm.
are parents who are splitting because there was domestic violence. It's dangerous situation, and that's why I think those cases have got to be dealt with in a real court because those are real allegations. There should be real penalties for that, right? But then the other category of parents are just the parents who are divorcing, splitting. Maybe they were never actually together, but you have the dad trying to access the child that he helped bring into this world, and they're just regular people.
Hmm.
And yet courts are applying their own judgment and making parenting decisions because that's what they're doing when they're deciding if what religion the kid can be, which parent gets to choose the religion,
Hmm.
what school district gets to be the kid's school district. When they're making parenting decisions, they're replacing the decision of fit parents
Hmm.
with their own judgment. And we need to be asking, why are courts doing that? Why are they allowed to do that by law? And what is the state's interest? What is their compelling interest in butting in to these personal parenting decisions when the parents are fit? Their only crime was splitting up.
I think they're there to create conflict. So these parents will keep fighting for, what is best for their child. Because that judge doesn't care about your kids. They don't like my kids, and I don't know if they even like their own kids. But I'm just saying, they're there to create more conflict. I've seen it when a parent doesn't do, say, a psych eval, and the judge says, "I'll give you another 6 weeks to do it, and we'll show up in October." And well, and then the parent still doesn't do it, and then the judge drags it out some more, or they're saying, "Okay, this is a good one. All right, if you guys can't come up with a visitation plan, you guys figure it out yourselves. Then there's a problem, then you'll have to bring it back in here." Well, when you've got a high conflict personality disorder that you have to deal with, you're going to have to drag it back in, and that's going to take another 6 weeks to get back in for another hearing.
Yeah, and that's a good point about these cases being constantly continued and things added on because, a lot of cases truly do end up settling in the end. And the bar association and the judges will often fight reform efforts because they say, well, most of these cases settle anyway.
Mm,
Well, after 2 years, typically somebody runs out of money or hope, and when you're broke and when you have not an ounce of hope left, yeah, a lot of people quit. It's a coerced agreement typically, not just a joint agreement. This is a non-problem because parents tend to agree anyway. Yeah,
right.
after you put them through the ringer for 2 years, so it doesn't even it's framed, by the established family law industry, judges included, that you know things are not really that bad. And that, yeah, there's bad cases, but generally parents come to an agreement, and these really serious cases, you know, they're just one-offs. And obviously, we know that that's not true. And so when we're trying to uh, make legislative change, that's what we're up against. We're up against the entire industry that says things are great. Yeah, there's some bad stories, but you know what, parents, we they're emotional and they just don't understand, and they all they care about is themselves. They care about their parental rights and not what's best for kids.
Mhm,
And I don't know a lot of, I'm not saying they don't exist, of course, but I don't know a lot of parents that just despise their kids that way. Most parents, even the not great parents, care about their kids and have an idea of what they believe is best for their child.
mhm. It's a very touchy subject, and when you've got so many people muddying the waters and they involve these psychologists, it just gets worse. And I also think to backpedal how these judges create more conflict, I really think these judges should be getting psych evals. They're ordering parents to get psych evals, sometimes one, two, three, four, that parents can't even afford hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars of psych evals. When we've got these sociopaths on the bench, they need to be drug tested, they need psych evals, and they need lie detector tests randomly.
Yeah.
If we're going to keep
Well,
family court, that has got to happen.
Well, for sure. They should be at least held to the same standard. If they're making decisions for our children and they want us to be tested to judge whether we should be making decisions for our children, the people who are making the decisions should also be, subject to the same standards. But I will say in my closed door meeting, the interested parties meetings with legislators and the judges themselves over the past few years, there is a general disdain that judges put off. So in those meetings, they were very condescending.
Mm.
They said some pretty offensive things about parents. I had, one judge said that dads just don't make good parents. I had another one say, well, listen, if I have a stay-at-home mom in front of me, there's no way I'm ever going to give that dad custody because she's always had the kids. And I'm just like, as a woman, that's actually offensive because to a single income household that becomes two households, that mom can't afford to be responsible solely for the kids. That dad, needs to step up really. And so there's just a lot of bias. And when we had our hearings for our bills, the judges actually came out and testified publicly against our bills. And one of the things that they said was, basically that parents, it's unnatural for parents to share equal responsibility for kids, and that we're setting them up for failure by trying to do that. So they do not believe that parents are capable. And part of it, I think they're jaded. There are really bad cases that they've seen, I'm sure.
Mhm.
And then, I would like to believe that they go into that role initially with a good heart. Um, I'm not naive enough to actually believe all of them were like that, but I would like to think some of them.
Mhm.
Judges in Ohio, though, they're elected. They're essentially politicians. They're attorneys turned politicians. So you don't have to have a background in family law to sit on a bench and make decisions for children like this. And so when you're a politician, I think that's a different uh, type of person. And so it changes you, and I, the things that they were saying about parents to me directly really told me that they just believe they are almost godlike, that they are the ones who know, they truly know what's best for us and they truly know what's best for our kids. And we're all unhinged and we need them to make these decisions for us.
Yeah, I have come across judges that just, they're in collusion with the opposing attorney. And what I have noticed in other parents' cases is that the judge and the opposing attorney, have worked in the DA's department for years. So if you want to win your case, try to judge shop to find the attorney who's worked together in this DA's department capacity so you can win your case.
Right.
But on a side note, I had found from a friend this transparencyusa.org. Okay. Now, if a parent Okay, if you want to research your judge, Ohio is on that map. So you can look at your judge and, since they're elected, find out what contributions were made to their judge campaigns. And what's so weird is, and the other question, I'm sure this is another podcast, is okay, so if the judge loses a campaign and say 87,000 was donated to the campaign, what happens to that money? Where does that go? You know what I'm saying? There's just questions. Um, you know, and here you're working on this SB 174 and they're bucking it by, did they present their own bill?
Yes. Okay. So the backstory is I was, as a citizen leading a charge to reform our courts legislatively. I successfully got two bills introduced, the last two GAs. They're pegged as equal parenting bills, which that was a part of it. And just for anyone who doesn't know, it was basically establishing a presumption that that's where you start. And then if it's not appropriate, you move away from that. But it's just a starting place because right now there is no starting place. So there's no point of negotiation to begin at, and Ohio law right now requires courts to pick a parent. So as long as the law requires courts to pick a custodial parent, um, parents are going to fight over that,
Mhm.
right? So if you just set the baseline flat and say we're not fighting over custody right now, we're going to come, everybody's equal, and then we'll move what is appropriate from there. That's what we were trying to do. And our bill was like 200 pages almost, but it did a lot of other things. It dealt with false allegations.
Mhm.
It required courts to track the outcomes of cases so we can actually get data because a lot of it is our word versus the judge's word on how things happen. So we were trying to, capture that data to inform the legislature of what's really happening. There's a lot of things wrapped up in this bill. Okay. The judges in the bar successfully blocked both of them. In the midst of all of that, though, the judges scrambled to write their own bill. So 3 years ago, the Ohio Judicial Conference, which is like the Association of Judges, is what I call it, they sent me a copy of a bill that they wrote. That bill is now Senate Bill 174. It was introduced in the Senate by two family law attorneys on behalf of the judges. The judge leading the charge is her pet project. So there was multiple judges that worked on this, but the main judge, Judge McColley, she's the mother of Senate President McColley. So he was actually trying to block our bill, and he successfully did last GA, and pitching her bill at the same time. So he did get two family law attorneys to pick it up. It's been introduced. It's got a lot of momentum behind it because the judges support it, of course. And the Bar Association has come out on the record in support of the bill as well. But the bill was retaliation. It was a counter bill to what we were trying to do with our bills. They're pegging it as, oh, this is um, a cross industry collaborative effort between parents, which is hilarious, judges, attorneys, all these different people that came together to help write this bill, and that's just completely false. They are pointing to a task force from 25 years ago that was created to look into family courts and how we can make things better. So there was a task force that was created 25 years ago, plus years ago, and they did put out a report. However, this bill does not reflect the recommendations of that report. But in their testimonies, they're like, "Oh, this is been 20 years. We've been working on this. It's awesome. It was very collaborative. It's child centered. We're taking the need to fight, out of it, so parents can get along. We've changed terminology that's more father friendly, and they're using all the buzzwords that those of us who've been advocating for change, the same words we've been using for 5 years. They've stolen them and applied it to their bill. So their bill is 400 pages. It's Senate Bill 174. It's 400 pages long. Most people are not going to sit and read that bill. So they're going off of what the judges and the attorneys say is in the bill. And they are completely misleading the public. They are misleading the legislators on what is in that bill.
Well, again, They're unethical.
Yeah.
This is
I
the
mean, why
most,
are judges writing bills?
yeah, that's not,
And
oh,
why are senators pitching their bills?
money, money, money. Well, and the thing is, their dockets are so full, they complain their dockets are so full, but yet they have time to write a bill.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Interestingly, Judge McColley did retire last year.
Oh,
I think it was because I started saying, "Why are sitting judges writing bills?"
mm-hmm.
And as soon as I started saying that publicly, guess what? She retired.
Yeah, I don't have anything better to do than break up families and write bills.
Right. Hmm. Well, and wait till you hear what's in the bill. Can't wait to get to that part.
Okay, tell me more.
Okay. So this bill is wild. It takes us back into pre-best interest of the child days. This takes us back to pre-custody days. It literally first of all, the reason it's 400 pages is because they cross out the words, they delete the words parental rights from the Ohio Revised Code, all custody statutes. So they are literally deleting parental rights, and in its place, they're calling it parental responsibilities. Then, so that's why it's so many pages, because that's parental rights is, throughout the entire custody statutes. You know what I mean? It's in there over and over and over. So they've deleted it. They're replacing it with parental responsibilities. And then they say that it's the court's responsibility to then dish out those parental responsibilities. So we don't have rights anymore. We have responsibilities, and only the court can decide how those responsibilities are being dished out. So that's like step number one. Step number two is they give themselves complete discretion. So if you've ever tried to appeal an order, you'll find out that courts have what's called broad discretion. That's a lot of power. I mean, that basically means it's really hard to overturn their orders because they have broad discretion, and discretion is basically their judgment on
Mhm.
what they think is best for the child. Because again, their only criteria is to decide what they feel is best for the child. So they have discretion to do that already, and it's very broad. But they've explicitly in this bill given themselves complete discretion. So that means you cannot appeal it because it's ultimate final say. And the bill requires them to micromanage parents because uh, every case that involves children going forward the court will have to create a very detailed, elaborate parenting plan. And they have to dictate things as small as how and frequency of contact between the parent. Um, you know, uh, every possible parenting decision you can imagine is in here, that the courts are going to be required to decide what happens with complete discretion.
Right. So they're going to write a bunch of no contact orders for good fit parents, basically.
Sure, and they'll be allowed to do that because they have complete discretion to do that. And the bill even calls out the agreement, the joint agreement of parents. Courts have complete discretion to make decisions over the joint agreement of parents. So we're not talking about two parents who can't come to a decision and someone's got to come in and just help, make a decision because they can't agree. No, no, no. This is even fit, law abiding parents who are in full agreement on how they want to raise their child. They're giving themselves complete discretion to decide instead what they feel is best for that child.
Yeah, Stalin would have loved this.
Oh, definitely. I keep saying that, and it sounds so dramatic. It feels very dystopian. It's hard to believe. In sponsor testimony and in proponent testimony, they conveniently left out those details, of course. And instead, they focused on we're changing terminologies to make things better, And one of the other things that they've done, the terms they've changed that they think is going to make things so much better is so right now courts have to choose a residential and custodial parent. That's why parents fight because they want to be the residential and custodial parent, right? Well, that term they feel is, it makes it sound like one parent is better than the other, and they're trying to make things better. So instead, we're going to call it a designated parent. I'm not kidding.
Oh, you see, and this is why a lot of parents don't get this because it's like double speak when these attorneys and judges talk. You have to have a Black's Law dictionary with you in the courtroom to look at this, what they're really saying and what it really means.
Right, right. And you're not, you again, we don't have normal due process, so you don't get an attorney to help you. If you can't afford an attorney, you don't have a right to attorney. I mean,
Hmm.
so a lot of parents are going in pro se, and
Hmm.
you really don't have a whole lot of chance if the other attorney is buddies with the judge. And that we do see that to touch on what you mentioned earlier, you know, most judges' campaigns are funded by attorneys. I mean,
Hmm.
that's where most campaign funds come from. A lot of attorneys do eventually want to be a judge. And so there's a lot of buddy-buddying, giving assignments to each other to stay in each other's graces. Judges in Ohio, though, typically do run unopposed. So we have counties, like some larger counties like Cuyahoga or Franklin County. There's a lot of judges and there's a lot of seats. So some of those elections might be contested. But most of Ohio is pretty rural. And in rural counties, judges almost always run unopposed. And the incumbent judges most likely were installed, not even elected. So if a judge decides to retire, they will retire um, what's the word I'm looking for? Midterm, and then the governor will appoint someone to take their spot because they're in the middle of their term. So
Hmm.
that person is installed, then they become the incumbent. And if you're an attorney, it is a career suicide to run against an incumbent judge and lose. So these judges run unopposed. So even though they're elected and we, the people, should be able to just vote these guys out, we really don't have much of a choice because attorneys won't run against them and these judges are installed anyway.
And a lot of these attorneys that want to be judges, these are attorneys that couldn't cut it into a major law firm. So their only other choice is to become a judge.
Yeah. I mean, judges in Ohio really don't make a lot of money. And a lot of cases are most cases are actually heard by magistrates, not even an actual judge, which is interesting because magistrates in Ohio are not elected, they're appointed. So we have unelected court officials residing over these cases with no background in family law, some of them, or if they do have background, they weren't excellent attorneys because magistrates make even less than judges. So we have highly unqualified people sitting on the bench. They're not making a lot of money, and the only way to make a living at it is to just keep climbing the power ladder. And so it's like it's just a stepping stone, just a ladder up. And the judges do have a lot of power. So I think when it comes to attorneys, guardians ad litem, all of those other people, they do make good money in this
Hmm.
industry. Judges, this is my opinion, I think that they're drawn to the power.
Oh, yes. Right. Because they have power over these parents.
Right. These despicable parents who they're just terrible people and we need them.
You know, I know people want cameras in the courtrooms. Did they bring that up in this bill? They probably don't want
Mm-mm.
those or tamper-proof mics in there either, do they?
No, and they didn't add anything about tracking the outcomes of cases either, of course. That was one of the things that when they testified against our bills, well, it's going to cost us too much money. We're going to have to hire additional staff. We can't track the outcomes of these cases. It's like, but we need transparency. If we're going to invest in anything, it's that. But I also think that was a lie because they already track the outcomes of these cases to an extent already. It's just a matter of a couple extra boxes to check.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
they have an
Yeah.
excuse for everything, and they continually move the goalpost too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's also, you brought up, having a judge decide what religion a kid should be or whatever. Wasn't there separation of church and state? I,
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, when you make the decision for that child, you're making a parenting decision on behalf of the child. I mean, I do believe our family courts as they are right now are unconstitutional, but
Hmm.
there's no one willing to take that all the way to there's no one willing to hear those cases really. It's hard. I mean, we're fighting an uphill battle here. We're talking about an established um, mafia, if you will. You know, I mean, these are I refer to it as a dragon. I mean, we're fighting dragons here.
Right. Because it's like you can't get the bulk of the dragon because it has so many heads going everywhere.
Right. And
Um,
they're very powerful, very powerful. I mean, I've met with so many legislators who flat out tell me, I totally agree with you, but you're never going to get anything if the judges don't agree. You're never going to, you're ne it's never going to happen if you can't get the judges on board. And to which I say, why? You're the one with the vote. You're the one here to represent us. Why is a success of reform reliant on judges? Because there should be that separation of power. And the legislature is supposed to hold the judiciary accountable, and
mhm,
they're not. They're buddies. They're representing each other. Like they're supposed to be almost enemies. You know what I mean? Like
mhm,
they're supposed
mhm.
to be making sure that they both are, in line and doing what they're supposed to be doing and stay in your lane. And they're not. They're saying, "Come on over. How can I help?"
Oh yeah, they're having parties, they're having social parties at their house. There was one picture a parent sent me of a judge having a party, and I guess she put in a new bathroom, and she had all the attorneys stand in this huge bathtub and took a picture. I'm like,
Gross.
why? They're making complete fools of themselves because, I don't know how these people were raised, but they weren't raised with any type of ethics or integrity.
I think some of them did start out good. I really do believe that. I think they just become jaded, and the power is just so alluring. I mean, it's hard to combat that. And then when you're given the power, I think you just don't even see the damage you're doing. There are some evil people. I mean, of course, I do think there are some who really get off on destroying lives.
Oh yeah.
Really. But I think there are a lot who just don't even see the damage they're doing. They're blind to it because they're in their own little bubble. They have so much power. They're not really questioned. The attorneys, everybody worships you, it sucks up to you, and you become completely detached from reality. It's a whole
Hmm.
different world. It's not the real world, and they don't even see that. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I do think that is the case, with some of these judges.
Right. And I'm not a sociologist, but I have heard that 1 in 20 are sociopaths. So if you go into a courtroom, look how many sociopaths that are surrounding you. And this judge could even be a psychopath, sociopath, and he's identifying with your opposing attorney because he's wearing some plaid suit that you loved as a child. And you
Mhm.
go, and this judge is going back into their childhood saying, I love that green plaid. I had that when I was in the fourth grade. But they're doing this weird, this is why they need psych evals. They've got childhood issues also that they have not addressed. So when they have a parent coming in with, issues, they're going back to their own childhood trauma and dishing it back out onto that parent.
Mhm. And they're allowed. Yeah.
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 I'm,
Nobody's holding these people accountable. I mean, that's the bottom line because there are avenues supposedly to hold them accountable. Like you can file grievances,
mhm.
they're usually dismissed. They do publish stats on the number of grievances received in Ohio against judges, how many were dismissed, how many resulted in suspensions of licensure, things like that. How many are, and I didn't even, until I looked at the report, I didn't even realize this was an option. But a lot of them get the option of voluntary retirement.
Mhm.
So there's no penalty. You just have to voluntarily resign, or retire. But retired judges in Ohio, a lot of them aren't even really retired. That just means they don't become reelected because if judges are on vacation,
Hmm.
or unavailable for whatever reason, or if the caseload is too big, which is some of these bigger counties, they bring in traveling judge or visiting judges.
Hmm.
Visiting judges are judges who are not elected; they're just kind of appointed to fill in. So some of these retired judges that were voluntarily retired because of bad behavior are allowed to still be paid to sit on the bench by taxpayers and just fill in an unelected capacity. So there really is no true accountability for these bad actors. And we see the same thing with like law enforcement when you have problematic officers that they just kind of move around to other jurisdictions or precincts. There's really not, um, you know, penalties for the behavior. They just kind of sweep it under the rug and move them. They just relocate them. Same thing
Hmm.
with the judges. They just voluntarily retire and then they become visiting judges.
Right. And then the newspaper writes up a big, beautiful article on a judge in their retirement and to give hope to parents that, you know, file these grievances against these judges.
Yeah.
Don't stop. The more it could be the 114th complaint that actually gets a judge off the bench.
Yeah. For sure.
You're right.
For sure. I mean, I tell everyone I know, file those grievances, expect it to be rejected, but we need the paper trail. We need to show because those numbers are tracked, how many are filed. So we need to track those because we can see how many. If we are not filing these grievances, then it is always going to be our word versus theirs.
Yes, definitely. And because I know I had filed, I think, 2 to 3 grievances on a judge. And finally, a couple years later, I filed another one. And I had a friend help me write it because I wanted to make sure it was going to be done right. And we did it right. And I also included another case. Some other poor man was writing to appeal a child support decision while he was in jail. And I can't imagine the stress of that. But I included his case in my grievance and everything she did to me. And, I'm telling you, I filed that in like the summer. This is like 2 years ago. And then I didn't hear anything, but I love Halloween. That's my favorite holiday. I get the mail and they were investigating her. And it was like, I had to sit down. I had to call my friend and say, guess what? You know? And we were shocked because only 1% actually goes through a year, maybe, if that. And so we didn't know what had happened. Like we didn't hear anything for months and months. So January rolled around, and here, my dad looks at his laptop, and there's a big write-up in the newspaper how she's voluntarily retiring and going to go scuba diving and enjoy her life because she can afford to do that off the taxpayer's back, right?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. So, when we were at the end of last year, we filed grievances against the judges who came to testify against our bills because we felt like that was
Mhm.
a violation of separation of powers to be a sitting judge and to leave the bench during business hours to come and testify against a piece of legislation that would directly impact your work, right?
Uh-huh.
Those grievances were completely dismissed. They said they found no wrongdoing. Mhm.
You know, I don't know what to say.
They're out of control.
Well,
I mean, they really are. And why wouldn't you? I guess they don't, it's not even that they have a long leash. They don't even have a leash.
well, I mean, I, I just tell parents just pray over your case. Ask God to remove the judge. Get him out of your life. Just let God deal with them. And I think I told you my story over the phone, how God dealt with my judge, and it can be, God can do anything. Maybe this is the only way if they're gonna file a bill out of spite to,
Yeah. And
you're
it's a
trying to
bad bill.
Right. You're trying to help families, even if they're divorcing, and this is a horrible situation, and there's abuse and everything going on, and these judges they just don't care about families. They just care about the money coming in.
And the notoriety. I mean, that particular judge, McColley, when she retired, she got a big award from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network as being an amazing advocate. And I'm thinking she just spearheaded a bill that gives them more power to make decisions against the judgment of fit parents. That impacts victims of domestic violence. That is not a friendly bill to victims. And yet you have ODVN giving this judge an award and then coming out a couple of weeks ago and testifying in favor of this bill. So it's incredibly concerning. And I think a lot of it has to do with just supporting your buddies, when you're at that level, when you're at the state level and you're with organizations that get millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer money, you want to keep those relationships. And unfortunately, it really appears that a lot of these bills that get proposed and passed are really based on who your friends are and supporting your friends and not really what's best for the people.
Shouldn't that place be audited,
Which place?
the ODVM?
I would I would think so. I did try and ask a lot of questions because they do get a lot of funding, and they have a lot of services. They support a lot of shelters, for women, which is great. But they don't have shelters for men, even though men experience domestic violence at almost the same rate as women. But there's just hardly any services for men. So how can you get that much funding for victims and it's really a one-sided service? But I tried to ask those questions, a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
couldn't get answers, and no one wants to touch it, especially legislators, because it looks really bad if you stand up or ask questions of some of these big domestic violence organizations. That's not a good look. And they don't want to do that because they don't want to look like they're against victims.
And the ultimate victim, I know it is the child, but also the parents. Parents are losing their lives over these cases.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not ending. People are having strokes, people are having heart attacks, they're unaliving themselves. They're
Yeah.
being driven to this by this evil that has encompassed this country from the Bar Association that has tentacles all over the world.
Yeah.
The
Well,
book,
so they have lobbyists at the state house, like very well paid lobbyists. And one of their lobbyists that I kind of got into a little bit in the hallway last GA, he's the same. If you follow Ohio politics, like HBO just put out a special about some of the corruption in Ohio, over a first energy scandal, an energy scandal here in Ohio. And one of the lead lobbyists on that whole scandal it was the lobbyist for the Bar Association. So we're talking very, very, very powerful, wealthy, corrupt people that are at the state house all day, every day, meeting with legislators, telling them what to do. They have a lot of power. Legislators really rely on these lobbyists to tell them what to do. They really, really do. And it is highly concerning to me as a citizen, to see how much power these lobbyists have over we the people.
it's this is heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, that's what
It's-
I'm saying. I don't think reform is going to work. It's going to have to be completely abolished. And if you're fighting dragons to do it.
mhm.
But I like fighting dragons.
Yes,
I mean, I'm still in it because I care, and like the harder they fight me, the louder I'm going to be. And I'm probably going to start looking unhinged really soon because I'm sick of the crap. Like I am not afraid to call these people out. A little side note about me, my husband and I own a production company, video production. So we work with brands, corporate brands, doing video content. We put out a documentary a couple of years ago. It's called We the Parents. It's on YouTube for free. Anyone can watch it.
Hmm.
The angle is shared parenting and the importance of parents and how courts sabotage parents when it comes to you know uh, parenting decisions in custody. Um, but that was just like our foray. We created a documentary about it because if you haven't lived it, it's hard to believe.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so we wanted to put it in a digestible way for people who are not in the throngs of it to just sit down and watch a quick, it's less than an hour, little documentary, about family courts and how they work against fit and loving parents. So we did that a couple of years ago. But because we have that background and we funded the whole thing ourselves, we did
Hmm.
it, out of passion. But we do video content. I mean, that's what we do.
Yeah.
So we're not afraid to use that content. So we put together some videos highlighting the testimonies from the last hearings in the last General Assembly from these judges and some of the outrageous things. So they even went on the record in hearings admitting that they wrote a bill in public testimony. The judges, the domestic relations judges, since 2020, have written a bill that is before you and that is highlighted on the page 3 of my testimony. And we strongly urge you, to consider that bill. So it was always a our bill versus their bill thing. Public testimony, it's
Well,
wild. So we put
as,
together some videos highlighting that on our YouTube page.
oh, good. As a taxpayer, it would highly concern me, even if you weren't involved in the court system. Why are judges even doing this with my tax-paying dollars?
Your guess is as good as mine. And it's a little crazier than even that because so we have the Ohio Judicial Conference. They're the ones who always send judges to testify. Okay. The Ohio Judicial Conference was created by the legislature. So they are a legit organization that was created by the legislature, but for one purpose. And the purpose was when there is pending legislation, we need someone from the courts to explain the fiscal impact that this bill might have on courts. So it was very transactional. Very, if this bill passes, we're going to need 10 million more dollars in funding because we're going to have to, do X, Y, and Z. It's supposed to be unbiased, just data, fiscal impact report, right? It's not supposed to have any opinions in it. Well, today, this was decades ago when it was established. Today, the Ohio Judicial Conference is a lobbying organization. That's what they do. That's why they were in all of our interested parties meetings, along with the bar lobbyists, because they are a lobbyist group. That's what they do. They lobby bills. They lobby for bills, they lobby against bills, and they are taxpayer funded. Right now in the Senate, they're having hearings on the next budget, the next state budget, and OJC has a big fat line item in the budget to pay them to do what they do with taxpayer money. And they've asked for an increase. And so far, legislators have given them that increase. I know,
Wow.
it's unbelievable.
Yeah. People just don't realize this stuff until it happens to them. I always say that, you know, um, but I'm so glad you've taken this on. Tell me about your YouTube channel.
So our YouTube is We the Parents Movie. There is an old uh, little short documentary from like 2013 that was called We the Parents. That has to do with school choice. That's not us. So ours is We the Parents Movie. And it's the film. And again, the angle on that is mostly focused on equal parenting and how family courts sideline fit parents and how that happens and why that happens. So it's a very good intro into family courts. We don't focus on alienation, we don't focus on false allegations, but we mention them, but we don't focus on them. The whole gist is, listen, if the system is set up to do this for fit and loving parents, nobody has a chance, right? So
Mhm.
that's why we started there. But we have other video short clip content about these issues that are specifically happening in Ohio because I want it out there for the public. Like the public needs to know. And
Mhm.
if we don't stand up together, we are going to lose our rights. Okay, this judge's bill has a lot of momentum behind it. The judges are behind it. Legislators are terrified of standing up against the judges in the bar. And the only way they're going to have the guts to do that is if there's enough of us people saying no.
Hmm.
It can't just be me and my little team here. Like, we have got to, as citizens, in mass, oppose this thing because
Hmm.
otherwise we will lose our rights. This bill takes away parental rights.
And that's terrifying.
Yeah.
I what I do, because I'm over here in Pennsylvania, but I try to talk to young people and tell them not to even go in there. Don't even go in the family court. I had some guy come over and fix my window. And I said, "Hey, have you ever been to family court?" He wasn't wearing a wedding band or anything, but I didn't care. He said, "Oh yeah, my ex-wife and I, we went in there. We heard what they were saying. We walked out, we looked at each other, and we said, 'Hey, we can handle this ourselves.'"
Yeah.
So there's smart people that will do that, but there's the unfortunate parent that's being dragged in there by a personality disorder on top of their attorney being a personality disorder, and they get sucked in because, as you know, people will say to these parents, "Well, just don't go in there. You don't have to go to family court." Oh, when you're sucked in, you are in there for the duration.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And attorneys fan the flame. So when I mentioned that my case turned out fine. I ended up having, shared parenting, equal parenting with my ex, and my kids are grown now. But when I initially consulted an attorney, so again, I have no background in family courts or divorce. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that we had to legally get divorced. So I consulted an attorney, and I went in on behalf of myself and my soon to be ex and said, "Can you help us draft up a divorce decree?" I had no idea anything, right? What
Yeah.
that meant or anything. That's why I was consulting with an attorney. And she said, "Well, I can represent you, but I cannot represent him. He's going to need an attorney."
Mm.
And I now know that that's not necessarily true. She can't technically represent both, but she could have still drawn up the papers and we could have signed it and been done with it, right?
Right.
But no, she said, "I'll help you, but he needs an attorney." So he went and got an attorney. And even
Mhm.
though we went in amicably, again, I don't want to say we were not high conflict. We were. There was a reason we were getting divorced. We did not like each other. We did not get along. We were fighting constantly, but we did not want a messy divorce, and
Mhm.
we didn't want to fight over the kids. We involved the attorneys, and it still took us 2 years almost to be done with it. And so I know for a fact that the most well-intended people go in there and get sucked in by attorneys because you don't know what you're doing, and you just trust that this professional is going to represent you and it's going to keep things amicable.
Right. Right. And these attorneys are, I think, well, from what I've seen, they're if not worse than the judges.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, definitely. Well, there's a lot
And
of money to be made.
oh yeah, and I always tell parents, file complaints on them too. Whatever
Hmm.
state you're in, find out where you file these complaints. Now, what happened to me was I filed a complaint on a fellow, and it came back, the namby-pamby letter. Oh well. And for 2 weeks, it just bothered me. It like chewed at me. Like I was like, really, it's not sitting right. So I called back. I called the U.S. Supreme Court Disciplinary Board, and I talked to a lawyer there, and he was super. He said, "Can you give us more information? Give us more detail than what you wrote the last time." So I did. And wouldn't you know, it came back as this lawyer got in trouble. So
Yeah.
don't,
Well, I had a similar experience in our advocacy efforts. So before our bill got introduced the first time, I thought, it might be helpful to get some input from some judges and attorneys because, they know legalese, right?
Mhm.
And to help, just talk terminology, just to make sure that, this is sound, right?
Mhm.
And we were working with a magistrate who was very much supportive of what we were doing. And so she was helping us. And she's like, "Oh, you know what? I know a couple judges in Northern Ohio who, I know that, they would love this too. And is it okay if I reach out to them and see if they'd look at the bill too and, provide any kind of feedback on terminology?" I was like, "Yes, that's great." So I was like, "Oh, we've recruited some judges and magistrates to help us. Awesome."
Mhm.
Yeah, like 2 days later, she called me in a panic because she had gotten a threatening phone call herself, basically telling her to stop. that if she's interested in helping with legislation, then she needs to be helping them on their bill and she needs to no longer speak with us. And so she's like, I'm so sorry. I feel terrible, but I cannot risk my career. Mhm.
Sometimes you have to.
Mhm. Well, she's a magistrate, so she's appointed.
Oh,
So she, if the judge didn't like what she was doing, she could get fired right away. Which I'm the type of person I'd be like, come on, fire me.
oh yeah, to just collect
But not
unemployment.
everybody is like that.
Yeah, you have to take a stand. Either you have to stand for what's right, and if that means getting fired, then get fired.
That's how I feel. That's why I'm still
Right.
here.
So she had no guts, and
Yeah.
she didn't back up children or families,
Yeah.
which means she's um, enabling,
Complicit. Yeah.
yep, to
hmm
this child abuse and parental suffering, torture. You know, how can people help you and get involved?
So I have an email list that I send out with legislative updates and calls to action. So if you're interested in general, I'll add you, but especially if you're in Ohio, we really need Ohio citizens to be loud about this, posting on social media, sharing information, telling your friends, emailing legislators, calling legislators, going to the state house, because I'm telling you, these lobbyists walk the halls all day, every day. They have an unfettered access to these legislators that we just don't have. So we are competing with dragons again. So if you're interested and you want to help and you want to do something, reach out to me. I would say email me directly at McNeese, McNeese at Gmail. And then I'll add you to my email list. Um, with updates because I do have some specific calls to action. I have some, we've created a web link for people to fill in a little widget. You just put your name and address and they'll automatically email your senator about this bill. So for people who don't know who your senator is and you're not sure how to do that, this is just like a fill in the blank form that will
Mhm.
automatically connect you with them. So I have a lot of those types of resources. I also have a presentation I put together. We just had last night a Zoom call, all hands on deck, where I
Mhm.
went through a presentation. I went through the bill and what it does and how it works and where it came from, which is also available that I'm happy to share as well.
Mhm. Well, can others, people from other states also help out? Because what happens to you in Ohio can eventually branch out into other states.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you, if we successfully got a bill passed written by judges that gives them unlimited power, of course the other states are going to want to do that same thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm happy to add you to my list, even if you're not in Ohio, but I definitely want to make a call out to Ohio
Right.
because our legislators, they're easy to dismiss people who aren't from Ohio. So we've had some leaders of national groups and organizations come to testify before, and they just dismissed us. Oh, well, you're not from Ohio.
Mhm.
You know,
Well,
any excuse will do.
right. But I'm visiting Ohio, you know. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on and I appreciate your documentary, We the Parents, and I encourage everyone to go to her YouTube and look at this. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Um, just a little bit of hope. I mean, I do think if we can stand up together and unite, I think we can stop this, but it is going to be up to us. If we don't, we have no hope. But if we do come together, there's a lot of organizations that are trying to reform family courts, abolish family courts, and they typically have different approaches and different niches and areas of focus. But I think we have to put those aside for now and focus on the big picture here.
Hmm.
That this is not about fathers' rights. This is not about mothers' rights. This is not about domestic violence. This is not about parental alienation. This is not about equal parenting. This is about courts writing law that gives them unlimited power, and we have to stop it.
I agree. Thank you so very much for speaking out on my podcast. You know, keep me posted on things. Don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, and you can find me on Spotify, YouTube. Please like and subscribe, Apple iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and other platforms. I don't know about. Again, feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this going. Thank you, Elizabeth McNeese. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.